You remember the sound of the front door closing behind you in the morning, and the next time anyone expected to see you was when the streetlights came on. No phone in your pocket. No way for your mother to reach you. No way for you to reach her. And somehow, that was normal. That was childhood. That was the agreement everyone made, without ever saying a word out loud. If you were raised in the 1980s, you were handed a kind of freedom that no child today would recognize. And I want to tell you something most people have never stopped to consider. That freedom didn't just shape your memories. It shaped you. It shaped the way your spirit learned to listen. It built something inside you quietly, slowly, over thousands of ordinary afternoons that God is now trying to use. My name is George, and I've spent a long time sitting with people who grew up the way you and I did. People who can't quite explain why they feel like strangers in their own time. People who walk through a loud, fast, glowing world and feel a pull toward something older, something quieter, something that doesn't announce itself. If that's you, stay with me. Because I don't think you ended up here by accident, and by the time we're done, I think you'll understand why. Let's go back. Not to the nostalgia. Not to the toys or the cartoons or the songs everyone reposts online. Let's go back to what was actually happening to you, to your mind, your spirit, the deep architecture of who you became. Think about what an ordinary day required of you. You woke up, and there was no screen waiting to tell you what to feel. There was a window. There was a ceiling you'd stared at 1,000 times. There was boredom, real, aching, endless boredom. And you had to do something with it. You had to invent. A stick became a sword. A patch of dirt became a kingdom. A long car ride with nothing but the back of a seat in front of you became hours of stories told entirely inside your own head. And here's what most people miss. That boredom wasn't empty. That boredom was a workshop. In all that silence, in all that unstructured nothing, your inner world was being built brick by brick. You learned to sit with yourself. You learned to entertain your own soul. You learned that the most interesting thing in any room was often happening behind your own eyes. Children today rarely get that. Every empty moment gets filled before it can become anything. The silence gets interrupted. And I'm not saying that to judge anyone. Parents are doing the best they can in a world that moves faster than any of us were built for. But I want you to see what you were given. Because you were given something precious, and you may have never once recognized it as a gift. You were given an inner room. A place inside yourself where you could go and be alone and be okay. And do you know who else needed that room? Do you know who God has always met in exactly that kind of space? Think about the prophet Elijah. He had just come off the greatest victory of his life, fire from heaven, the whole nation watching, the impossible made real in front of everyone's eyes. And then he ran. He ran into the wilderness and collapsed under a tree and asked God to let him die. He was empty. He was done. And God didn't send him a crowd. God didn't send noise or spectacle or another mountaintop moment. God sent silence. Elijah stood at the mouth of a cave, and there was a great wind that tore the mountains apart, but God wasn't in the wind. There was an earthquake, but God wasn't in the earthquake. There was a fire, but God wasn't in the fire. And then, after all of it, there came a sound. A low, gentle whisper, a still small voice. And that whisper in the silence was where God finally spoke. Now think about what that means for you. If God speaks in the whisper, then the person who has learned to tolerate silence has an advantage that money can't buy. The person who got bored as a child and learned to be still, that person has ears the rest of the world is losing. You were trained, without knowing it, to hear the kind of voice that doesn't shout. That's not nostalgia, that's formation. Something real was built in you, and it goes deeper than silence. Let me tell you about something else the 1980s gave you. Something harder. Something that didn't always feel like a blessing at the time. You were allowed to struggle. You were allowed to fail and fall and figure it out on your own. If you got into a fight on the playground, no one was filming it. No one was tracking your every move. If you fell off your bike, you got up, you wiped the gravel out of your knee, and you got back on. There was no one hovering over you to soften every blow. You learned that the world would knock you down, and that you were capable of standing back up. Think about that for a second. You built resilience before anyone had a word for it. You developed a quiet inner toughness, not the loud kind, not the kind that needs an audience, but the deep kind. The kind that knows how to endure. The kind that has been tested in small ways 10,000 times and came out the other side knowing one simple truth: I can handle hard things. And the Bible has a word for what that kind of struggle produces. The Apostle Paul, who knew more about hardship than almost anyone, wrote that suffering produces perseverance. And perseverance produces character. And character produces hope. That's the chain. Struggle on one end, hope on the other. And you were put through the early links of that chain before you could even understand what was happening to you. The skinned knees, the being left out, the figuring it out alone in your bedroom when no one came to fix it. None of it was wasted. All of it was building the kind of person who doesn't crumble when life gets heavy. The kind of person God can actually use. Because He doesn't need fragile vessels. He needs people who've been tested and didn't break. Let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered why you can handle things that seem to flatten other people? Why crisis finds you and you somehow stay standing? Why people come to you when their world is falling apart, even though you've never advertised yourself as strong? It's because you were forged early. And the forging wasn't comfortable. But comfort has never been the goal. Character has always been the goal. And there's something else hidden in those long, unsupervised hours that I don't want you to miss. When you were out there in the neighborhood, roaming until dark, you weren't just playing. You were learning how to be with other people, without anyone refereeing it. You had to settle your own arguments. You had to figure out how to be fair, how to take turns, how to make peace after a fight, without an adult stepping in to fix it. You learned to read a face and know when someone was hurt, even if they wouldn't say it. You learned the unwritten rules of belonging, how to include the kid who was left out, how to forgive the friend who wronged you, how to start over the next day like nothing happened. Those are not small skills. Those are the skills of a peacemaker. And Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." You were practicing that calling before you had any idea it was a calling. Every time you made peace on a playground, every time you welcomed someone in, every time you let go of a grudge so the game could continue, you were rehearsing the very heart of the gospel. The world is full of people now who never learned to do that, who can't disagree without destroying, who can't be wronged without burning it all down. And you carry something they're missing. You learned, in the dirt and the dusk of 100 ordinary evenings, how to live with people. Now I want to talk about something tender. Something a lot of us carry and rarely name. If you were raised in that era, there's a good chance you experienced a particular kind of loneliness. Not because you were unloved. Most of us were loved deeply by parents who worked hard and did their best. But you were often left to process the big things by yourself. The fear after a nightmare. The confusion when the grown-ups argued behind closed doors. The ache of feeling different from the other kids. You sat with those feelings alone, in the dark, with no one explaining them to you. And that loneliness, as much as it hurt, taught you something. It taught you to look inward for comfort. It taught you to develop an interior life. It made you reflective in a way that people who were never alone simply aren't. You became someone who thinks deeply, who feels deeply, who notices things other people walk right past. Do you know who else spent his formative years in a kind of isolation? Joseph, sold by his own brothers, carried into a foreign land, thrown into a prison cell for a crime he never committed. Years of his life spent alone, forgotten, with nothing but his own thoughts and his God. And in that loneliness, something was being prepared. The boy who went into the pit was not ready to stand before Pharaoh. But the man who came out of the prison was. The isolation didn't destroy him. It refined him. It made him into the only person in the kingdom who could read the meaning beneath the surface of things. That's what solitude does in the hands of God. It doesn't just leave you alone. It teaches you to see. And let me stay here a little longer, because there's a particular kind of childhood solitude that Scripture treats as sacred ground. Think about the boy Samuel. He was just a child, sleeping in the temple, when a voice called his name in the dark. Samuel, he sat up and ran to the old priest Eli and said, "Here I am, you called." And Eli said, "I didn't call you, go back and lie down." It happened again and again. 3 times that boy got up in the night, certain someone was calling him. And 3 times, he found no one. He was alone in the dark, with a voice he couldn't place. And here's the thing I want you to notice. Samuel was a child who already knew how to be still in the night. He wasn't surrounded by noise. He wasn't being entertained out of every quiet moment. So when God finally spoke directly, when Eli understood and told the boy what to say, Samuel was able to lie back down and listen and answer, "Speak, for your servant is hearing." That moment changed the course of a nation. And it started with a child who was alone, in the dark, who had learned to pay attention to a voice in the silence. How many nights did you lie awake as a child, alone with your thoughts, alone with the dark, sensing something you couldn't quite name? You probably thought it was nothing. You probably thought you were just a kid who couldn't sleep. But what if some of that was God beginning to call your name, training your spirit to recognize a voice the rest of the world drowns out? What if those quiet nights weren't empty at all, but were the first lessons in a lifelong conversation you're only now beginning to understand? And I wonder, have you ever felt like you see things other people miss? Like there's a layer underneath the obvious that's visible to you and invisible to almost everyone else? That's not your imagination. That's the fruit of an interior life that started growing in you decades ago. In all those quiet, lonely hours you never thought twice about. There are messages that pass through your eyes, and there are messages that pass through your spirit. If something in you recognized itself while watching, don't dismiss it. That is the Spirit confirming what was already written. The secret protocol carries 7 keys that unveil what heaven deposited in you before you ever arrived, things no one around you has ever been able to name. It comes with the full audiobook for your moments of prayer, silence, and encounter with God. And you also receive the Awakening Map, the guide that illuminates the 5 seasons of spiritual awakening, revealing with precision exactly where you are and what comes next. The link is pinned in the first comment, but only for a limited time. Don't let this moment pass without a response. Now let me come back to you, because I don't want this to feel like a history lesson. I want you to feel it. I want you to understand that the way your mind was shaped is not a small thing. It's the reason you're who you are. And it's the reason God can reach you in ways He may not be able to reach a generation that never sat still. Think about how you remember things. Most of the formative moments of your childhood live in your memory, not on a screen somewhere. You didn't document everything. You lived it. Which means your memory had to do the work of holding it, and memory that has to work becomes strong. You can close your eyes right now and walk through the house you grew up in. You can smell your grandmother's kitchen. You can hear a specific voice calling your name across a yard that doesn't exist anymore. That's a kind of richness that 1,000 photographs can't replace, and there's something deeply spiritual about that. Because the God of the Bible is constantly telling his people to remember. Remember what I did for you. Remember where I brought you from. Remember the day in the wilderness. Faith in the scriptures is built on memory, on the deliberate act of holding on to what God has done so that you can trust him for what he's about to do. And you, my friend, were trained to remember. You carry your whole life inside you, vivid and alive, not stored on a device somewhere, but written on the walls of your own soul, where no crash and no broken screen can ever erase it. That's not a small thing in the eyes of heaven. Let me tell you about something else you absorbed, without realizing it, the value of presence. When you were a child and a friend came over, that friend was actually there, fully there. No one was half looking at a glowing rectangle. When your family sat at the dinner table, the people across from you were present in their bodies and their attention. You learned what it feels like to be with someone, really with them. And because you learned it, you can feel its absence. You walk into a room now where everyone is physically together but somewhere else entirely, and something in your spirit grieves. You can't always explain it, but you feel that something sacred has gone missing. That grief is not weakness. That grief is wisdom. You're mourning the loss of something you know to be precious because you tasted the real thing, and the longing it creates in you, the longing for genuine connection, for undivided attention, for the warmth of one human being fully turned toward another. That longing is holy. It's the same longing God has for you. He doesn't want a piece of your attention. He wants you fully present, fully turned toward him, the way a friend once sat across from you and simply was there. Think about how Jesus moved through the world. He was never in a hurry. He let himself be interrupted. When the woman who had been bleeding for 12 years reached out and touched the edge of his garment in a crowd of hundreds, he stopped. In the middle of everything, with people pressing in on every side, he stopped, and he turned, and he gave her his full attention. He wanted to see her face. He wanted her to know she was known. That's presence. That's the thing you learned to value before the world forgot how. And here's a question worth sitting with. In a world that has largely lost the ability to be present, who do you think God is going to use to remind people what it feels like to be seen? It's going to be the ones who never lost it. It's going to be people like you. I want to talk now about how you came to faith, or how faith came to you, because this matters too. For a lot of us raised in that time, faith wasn't something we researched or debated into existence. It was something we absorbed. It came to us through a grandmother's hands folded in prayer, through a hymn sung slightly off-key in a small church, through a worn Bible on a nightstand, through the simple, unshakable belief of someone who loved us and never once doubted out loud. Faith was caught more than it was taught. It came in through the heart before it ever reached the head. And there's a strength in that kind of faith that the modern mind underestimates. Because when you believe with your heart first, your faith has roots that argument can't reach. You can't be debated out of something you absorbed in your bones as a child. The skeptic can throw every clever question at you, and somewhere deep down there's a quiet voice that says, "I know what I know. I felt it before I could explain it." That's the faith of a child. And do you remember what Jesus said about that? He said, "Unless you become like a little child, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." The disciples were trying to push the children away, thinking they were a distraction from the serious business of the Messiah. And Jesus stopped them and said, "No, let them come. Because they have something you've lost. They believe without needing to dismantle it first. They trust without first demanding proof. You were given that kind of faith, and even if life has tried to talk you out of it, even if there have been seasons of doubt and distance, the root is still there. The child who believed is still inside you, and God has never stopped reaching for that child. Let me bring all of this together, because I think there's a picture forming and I want you to see it clearly. You learn to be still, so you can hear the whisper. You learn to struggle, so you have the character to endure. You learn to be alone, so you develop the interior life that lets you see beneath the surface. You learn to remember, so your faith is anchored in what God has done. You learned to be present, so you can offer people the gift of being truly seen. You learn to believe with your heart, so your faith has roots that can't be argued away. Do you see it? Every one of those things the world considers outdated. Every one of those things that makes you feel like you don't quite belong in this loud, fast, distracted age, every one of them is a quality that heaven prizes. You're not behind. You're not out of step. You were shaped for exactly this moment, when the world has more noise than ever and fewer people than ever who know how to be quiet, how to endure, how to see, how to remember, how to be present, how to simply believe. You were not raised the way you were by accident. The struggles weren't pointless. The loneliness wasn't wasted. The boredom and the silence and the skinned knees and the off-key hymns, all of it was preparation. And the one who allows nothing to be wasted has been preparing you the whole time for a generation that desperately needs what you carry. Think about Esther, a young woman who had no idea why her life had unfolded the way it did. The loss, the upheaval, the strange path that led her into a palace she never asked for. And then came the moment when everything she had walked through suddenly made sense. Her cousin Mordecai said the words that have echoed for thousands of years. Who knows but that you have come to your position for such a time as this? Everything before that moment was preparation for that moment. Nothing in her story had been random, and nothing in yours has been either. Maybe you've spent years feeling like you were born in the wrong era, like you're carrying something from a world that no longer exists. Like the things that matter most to you are things nobody else seems to value anymore. I want to gently turn that around for you. What if you weren't born in the wrong era? What if you were placed in this one precisely because you carry what it's missing? What if the very things that make you feel like a relic are the things that make you essential for such a time as this? The stillness you learned, the world has lost. The presence you value, the world is starving for. The faith you absorbed, the world is desperate to recover. And you're not here to mourn what's gone. You're here to carry it forward. You're a bridge between a world that knew how to be human and a world that's forgetting, and God needs people standing on that bridge, holding the light, refusing to let the old wisdom die. I don't think you found this message by searching for entertainment. I think something in you has been quietly asking why you feel the way you feel, out of place, out of time, carrying something you can't quite name. And I hope tonight you've started to see the answer. You weren't made wrong. You were made for this. Shaped early, tested young, prepared in ways you never understood, for a moment that needs exactly the soul you became. So here's what I want from you, and I want you to be specific. Don't just leave a comment that says you enjoyed this. I want you to tell me one thing, one single memory from your childhood that you now realize was secretly shaping your spirit. Maybe it was a quiet afternoon alone. Maybe it was a struggle you faced by yourself. Maybe it was a grandmother's prayer, a hymn, a moment of stillness you've never forgotten. Name it. Write it down in the comments. Because when you put words to it, you'll start to see your own story, the way heaven sees it, not as random, but as preparation. And someone else, reading your words, may finally understand their own life a little better, because you were brave enough to share yours. And remember, everything I spoke about goes deeper inside the secret protocol, pinned in the first comment. The 7 keys, the audiobook, and the awakening map are there waiting for you whenever you're ready to take the next step.